Hello, folks, and welcome to today's program. This is the Livingston Tartan and the history of a fascinating fabric. My name is Emily, and I'm going to talk to you today about the history of the Scottish tartan or the plaid in American culture, Scottish culture, all over the world, and also how it relates to the Livingston family. So, many people don't know this, but the Livingstons are, generally speaking, considered to be a Scottish and Dutch family. There's a lot of other backgrounds that have married in over the years, but the Livingston family has always held very tight to their Dutch and Scottish roots. This is because the very first Livingston in America was a man by the name of Robert Livingston. He had been born in Scotland in the early part of the 17th century, and then moved to Holland as a child, moved back to Scotland as a teenager, and then eventually comes to America. He comes to New York purposefully because New York had only recently become an English colony. Before then, it had been a Dutch colony known as New Amsterdam, so he spoke the language really well. But as someone of Scottish birth, he spoke English and he got along really well with the English settlers in the area. He marries a wealthy Dutch lady, and the rest is history, so they say. So the Livingstons have always really held on to the Scottish aspect of their roots. We'll talk a little bit more about the distinction between Scottish and English culture and why early Livingstons really wanted to keep that distinction a little later in our program today. But I just want to make it clear that the Livingston family tartan is very important to the family. You can see in this photo here from Scotland from 2009, even in the modern day, Livingstons all over the world are very proud of their heritage. You might notice there's an E at the end of Livingston on this sign. This Livingston family did not spell it with an E at the end, but it's all the same family. These common spellings are really only common going into the 20th century. Earlier, you just kind of spelled the name however you felt right at the moment. But anyway, what is a tartan? For more or less, a tartan is a plaid. That's the easiest way to put it. You can see here in the picture, we're all very familiar with these patterns. The word tartan is likely derived from a French word meaning tartar cloth. It's also similar to a Scottish Gaelic word meaning blanket, meaning a cross. And the word plaid is very close to a Gaelic word meaning blanket. And all of these things kind of make sense when you look at the tartan historically. Tartan is basically just a fabric that has been woven a certain way to make these beautiful patterns. And in the old Highland days, men would wear this pattern as a kilt, and women would often wear it as a blanket over their shoulders to keep themselves warm. So the tartan is a very important icon of Scottish culture. Originally, tartan designs didn't have any names or symbolic meanings. All tartan cloth was hand woven, and usually the wool or the material was supplied locally. So in some parts of Scotland, certain colors might be more common in your tartan, but that really more had to do with what materials were available to you rather than those colors or patterns having a specific meaning to your clan or the area where you're from. Different colors are popular all over Scotland, but in general, the tartan it still is very, very popular and a very important part of Scottish Highland culture. The tartan came to really be the icon of Highland culture, especially as Scotland and England become the United Kingdom in modern times. The tartan is really one of the defining icons of the Scottish Highland people. To the point where the tartan becomes outlawed out of concerns of rebellion in Scotland. So the Battle of Culloden in 1746 was the last stand in the campaign by supporters of the Catholic Prince Charles, Edward Stuart, to form a challenge to the ruling Protestant Hanoverian king, George II. I apologize, folks. I wrote all of my pronunciations down phonetically and really screwed up all of them there. But either way, this battle was the last stand between the Scottish Catholics and the Protestant English. It was a bloody battle, and it was the definitive end to any sort of restoration of the Stuart family or of a Catholic ruler in England. This was hundreds of years of conflict, all came down to one battle. And there were people from Scotland and England on both sides of this battle. It was really more of a religious thing. But either way, this battle leads to the definitive end of the Scottish Highlands lifestyle. There was in 1746, the English Crown puts out the Act of Prescription, which, amongst many things, outlawed the wearing of tartans. And if convicted of wearing a tartan, one would face 7 years of hard labor overseas. I'm going to read a little bit of the law here. This part is often referred to as the Highland the Highland Garb Act. So, in part, the law was passed saying, no man or boy within Scotland shall, on any pretext whatever, wear or put on the clothes commonly called Highland clothes. That is to say, plaid or little kilt, trowse, shoulder belts, etc., or any part of which is particularly belongs to Highland garb, and that no tartan or party-colored plaid or stuff shall be used for the great coats or upper coats, and if any such person shall presume after the said day of the 1st of August to wear or put on the aforesaid garments or any part of them, every such person so offending shall be liable to be transported to any of His Majesty's plantations beyond the seas, there to remain for the space of 7 years. Now, this law was in effect until 1782, meaning there was an entire generation who was not legally allowed to wear this garb, and an entire generation who was shipped overseas for wearing plaid. As I said, this was the end of the traditional Scottish Highlands lifestyle. This is where the Scottish lifestyle and the English lifestyle start to meld together a little bit more and become more clearly to outsiders one homogeneous island. However, this was not the end of the culture surrounding the tartan, and in fact, it came back stronger than ever. There was a prolific weaver named William Wilson, and he had a company with his family. It goes on for 4 generations. William Wilson never stopped making tartans. Now, he couldn't legally sell them in Scotland or in England, but he could sell them around the world. He exported tartan fabric all over North and South America, the West Indies, all through Europe and India, growing the popularity of the fashion internationally. And although it wasn't cut or worn the same way it was in the Scottish Highlands, it was still providing to be a very popular fabric for fashion lovers all over the world. By the time that the act was lifted in 1782, there was a huge domestic and international market for tartans or for plaids. And over the next 50 years or so, it's going to explode even further because we're going to get some interest in in the pattern and the history and the lifestyle of the Scottish people from people in very powerful high places. Now, before we get into the popularity of the tartan in England, we're going to swing back over to the Livingstons in America. Now, at the beginning of my presentation, I talked about Robert Livingston and how he was born in the 1600s and how he had effectively left Scotland and Europe by the mid to late 1600s. So his family's been in America for a long time. If you're not familiar with Clermont or the Livingston family, the Livingstons are one of the founding families of America. They're one of the great old aristocracy families in New York. And they are still very proud of their heritage. They're very proud of their Dutch heritage. Almost all the women who marry into the family for the first 4 generations are from old Dutch families. They're kind of feminist in a way. They run businesses, they have their own money. The family becomes very tall because the Dutch are the tallest ethnic group in Europe, but they always hold on to their Livingston name and their love for Scottish culture. So by the time we get to the early 1800s, Scottish culture is super popular in America. And if you are Scottish and you have a little money, you want to show it off. You want to get yourself a nice tartan. On this slide, you'll see Margaret Maria Livingston. She is the beautiful daughter of Robert the Chancellor, and she is posing in her beautiful Grecian dress and her turban with the Livingston family tartan behind her, draped over a chair and draped a little bit over her arm, it looks like. Now, she's posed with what isn't the official Livingston family tartan, but is very, very close. And we'll get into these official names and all that in just a moment. But for the Livingstons, aside from the fact that they are a family who's really proud of their history and that they love their family, they wanted to show that they weren't English at the same time. After the American Revolution, people who are not entirely of English descent are really excited to show that they are not entirely of English descent. If you are French, you're golden. The French are very popular. They helped us out during the Revolution. If you're Scottish, you're not English. They bullied you. And now you can show off your family's connection with a lovely tartan. Not only are you showing off your family's connection, you're also quite fashionable and very worldly at the same time. Margaret Maria and her sister Betsy are really interesting young women in the Livingston family for a reason that's going to sound a little strange until I explain it more. In a family where most of the women are well educated and don't have to marry at 18 and kind of they're supported by money, but they can do lots of things that English women were socially not trained for. Margaret Maria and Betsy pretty much got married as soon as they were 18 and had babies and were women of wealth and culture rather than women who were wealthy but also trained to take care of themselves, which sounds really anti-feminist, but because they were the daughters of Robert the Chancellor, one of the 5 drafters of the Declaration of Independence, a very important man who had no sons, they were raised with a sense of duty that they needed to be women who could go into high society of any country and show how wonderful and cultured American women could be. So they kind of adhered to the standards of England in a really weird way, but they were trying to show that they were cultured young women and that they were women who could be founding mothers in a way. But either way, they we're able to show this worldly connection through portraiture. And this picture of Margaret Mariah is really something. I don't think I've ever seen another picture where a young American woman is wearing a silk turban and a Grecian style dress and is draped in a Scottish tartan. It's really all right, folks. Sorry for the delay. My internet just dropped out, but I think we're okay. So anyway, we've now entered the 1820s, and Scottish culture and the tartan is about to get a huge boost in popularity in England itself, because King George IV is going to visit Edinburgh. I can't believe I just said Edinburgh. Edinburgh, that's how we say it. I swear I know how to say it, folks. I get a little concerned when I start pronouncing Old English and Gaelic words because I don't want to screw them up. But either way, King George IV visits Edinburgh in 1822, and he's the first reigning king to visit Scotland in over 200 years. It's a huge deal. And he decides that he is going to dress in the Scottish style when he goes to Scotland. And I have two pictures here. You can see we have a beautiful portrait of King George IV, looking very, very stylish in his Scottish garb. This is not the outfit he wore. Contemporary reports say that none of it was matched, and he was significantly overweight and nothing fit, and that his stockings were bright pink. Actually, this little caricature here on the side was drawn during his visit, and could give us a better idea of how the king may have looked when he visited Scotland. But either way, the king's visit created a kind of excitement, a tartan fest, if you will, when it came to the Scottish dress. Now, our friend Wilson has had his family's company going for 2 generations now. Wilson had put out a pattern book in 1819, just a couple of years before the king's visit, and it included about 250 tartans, and only about 100 of them were given names. They were given names pretty much just to differentiate them for sales clerks. And really what they did was just grab random families' names or random town names and throw them on a tartan and call it a day. Well, when the king was coming to visit Scotland, all of English high society wanted to have a tartan for their visit. And they had to make sure they were wearing the correct tartan. Some of them had Scottish ancestry. They wanted to know what their family's tartan was. So they start calling Wilson, and Wilson's like, oh, you have to talk to the chiefs, the Highland chiefs back in Scotland. They can help you out. So all of these Scottish Highland chiefs are getting letters before the king's visit from people asking what their tartan is. And they're writing to each other asking, what the heck are these people talking about? They didn't have a specific tartan because of their family name or the town they were from, but it kind of exploded into this idea that chiefs had to develop a clan tartan, that they had to have a tartan that identified their people. And this kind of sort of starts to spiral out of control at first, and then slowly into the Highland people themselves making decisions about what their clan's tartan colors were going to be. And if we go back to Margaret Mariah here, you can see she's wearing what will eventually basically be the Livingston family tartan. If you haven't guessed, this little tartan strip I have at the bottom of all of my slides is the Livingston family tartan. There's a couple variations on it. I'll talk about that at the end, but this is like the weaver's tartan. This is what a pattern maker would see when they went to make the tartan. So either way, King George visits Scotland, everyone goes nuts. They start trying to figure out what their clan's tartan is. Clans have to start deciding what their clan tartan is going to be, and it just snowballs from there. In fact, 20 years later, Queen Victoria gets a little bit of the Scottish fever herself. She has her beloved home in Scotland, Balmoral, and she loves plaid. She loves tartan. She wears it all the time. And she is a real fashion icon. She's a trendsetter of the mid and late 19th century. And pretty soon, you see people of all backgrounds taking tartans and plaid and translating them into the latest dress. Plaid is in the 1800s. And this goes on for decades. Now, by the time we get to the late 19th century, we have mail order catalogs in all English-speaking countries that are displaying plaids and all of the latest styles and the latest cuts of dress and coats and things like that. Plaid is not a super expensive fabric. Tartan is not a super expensive fabric to make, and it's quite durable. So it becomes very popular for workwear shirts. It becomes a big part of what we might call cowboy culture out in the Western United States. As we get into the 20th century, it still remains extremely popular. Here we have two ads for Pendleton. We've got kind of like a classic men's button-down shirt. These two men are fishing, and these are nice, well-made shirts that will hold up for a long time. And then on the other side, we have a whole family wearing the same plaid cut in 4 different styles, which is absolutely fabulous. They are visiting Disneyland and they're matching Pendleton outfits in, I think, 1968, something like that. Either way, absolutely beautiful. I love the daughter's dress. I think it's amazing. So throughout the 20th century, the tartan retains its role both as an internationally recognized symbol of Scottishness and an attractive fashion. And it starts taking on an oddly English tone as we get into the later half of the 20th century. Plaid becomes one of the defining iconic looks of the punk rock movement. Specifically, designers like Vivienne Westwood and Alexander McQueen still use plaid in almost all of their designs. Almost every season there's plaid. These two photos here, the photo with the 4 men is from the late 70s or early 80s, but the photo of the model is from Vivienne Westwood's 2017 line. Vivienne Westwood in particular is really interesting because she's famously interested in tartan, and she's had it in pretty much all of her catwalk fashion shows, but she had one for autumn winter 1993-1994 that was called Anglomania. And usually when we hear the word Anglo, we're thinking of the English, and this goes back to the idea of differentiating the English and the Scots. But either way, Anglomania was a massive hit. It was an iconic collection, and to this day, she still has a line called Anglomania that comes out usually every season, if not every other season, and carries back to the idea of using plaid, specifically using these royal plaids, these plaids that have some kind of old money air about them, and ripping them up and making them look as punk as possible. So to today, the tartan is still a huge symbol, a very important symbol of Scottish culture for Scots in Scotland and Scots abroad. There are people of Scottish background all over the world, not just these old families in Scotland or an old family here in New York, but all over the English-speaking world and then some. For my research for this project, I came across huge internet communities of people all over the world who are looking into and discussing their Scottish heritage. And generally speaking, they seem to be a very chill group of people. While researching this project, I kept coming across variations of the Livingston tartan, and I was a little concerned that I was going to present the wrong tartan. And I was reading through forum posts by people who were finding that for their own families. And the vast majority of forum users were like, hey, wear what you like. You like that plaid, call it yours and wear it. It's just fabric. We're all having a good time right now. And I think that's pretty cool. The Livingston family has their iconic plaid. They have a few variations on it, which you can actually see in this picture. There's two gentlemen right in the front who both have a red plaid. One is a very deep red with deep greens. The other one is a more muted red with a significantly more muted green. And when looking into purchasing a tartan, you'll often find that there is a modern version of the tartan and a traditional version of the tartan. Which means that these colors are made by a machine, so they're a bit darker and brighter. Whereas the other gentleman with his whole much more muted outfit is wearing the traditional colors. These are the colors that are more easily achieved by using natural materials without synthetics. And they're both totally valid ways to wear the Livingston tartan. So anyway, folks, thank you for coming on this adventure with me where we learned about the different kinds of tartans and the history of them and the way they're worn. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them in the comments. I'm not an expert on this by any means. It's all a bit new to me. So I may have to defer you to someone who knows more information. But either way, thank you for joining us today, and I hope you have a lovely day.